Sometimes one wrong seat can change your entire life. The soft glow of runway lights stretched across the polished floor of the private terminal as Ava Carter hurried through the crowded concourse, clutching her carry-on bag against her side. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the announcements overhead. The email confirming her last-minute invitation to an art showcase in Aspen had arrived less than 12 hours ago, and everything since then had felt like a blur. Her rideshare had been delayed, security had taken longer than expected, and now she was only minutes away from missing the flight that could change her career. Ava wasn't a celebrity artist or a gallery favorite. She was a struggling illustrator from Denver who spent most nights freelancing at her tiny apartment, hoping someone important would eventually notice her work. As she approached the gate, a uniformed flight attendant glanced at her boarding pass and offered a quick smile. "Miss Carter? Right this way." Ava nodded gratefully and followed without question. She was too exhausted to notice anything unusual. It wasn't until she stepped through the aircraft door that she realized this wasn't an ordinary flight. The cabin looked more like a luxury hotel lounge than an airplane. Cream-colored leather seats lined the spacious interior. Soft golden lights illuminated polished wood accents. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and expensive cologne. Ava stopped for a moment, confused. Had she boarded the wrong plane? Before she could ask, another attendant pointed toward a seat near the front. "Seat 2A, ma'am." Ava hurried forward, embarrassed by the attention. A tall man sat beside the window, dressed in a dark navy sweater and simple black slacks. He looked relaxed, one hand resting on a tablet, the other wrapped around a cup of coffee. There was nothing flashy about him, yet something about his calm presence immediately drew her attention. Ava glanced at her ticket, then at the seat number. "Sorry," she said with a nervous laugh as she settled into the chair beside him. "I think I'm holding up the entire flight." The man smiled. It wasn't the practiced smile of someone trying to impress her. It felt genuine, warm, familiar somehow. "Trust me," he replied. "I've seen much worse." Ava laughed despite herself. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. Outside the window, baggage crews moved beneath the bright airport lights. Inside, the cabin door closed. She looked around once more, still puzzled by the luxury surrounding her. "This doesn't feel like a normal flight," she admitted. The man glanced toward her. "Maybe it's not." Ava raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" His smile widened just enough to spark her curiosity. "Maybe you're exactly where you're supposed to be." She rolled her eyes playfully. "That's either really wise or really creepy." He laughed quietly. For the first time all day, Ava found herself smiling. She didn't know his name. She didn't know why the flight felt different. And she definitely didn't know that the stranger sitting beside her wasn't another passenger at all. What she couldn't possibly know was that Ethan Brooks owned the jet, the aviation company behind it, and a billion-dollar empire hidden behind a carefully guarded name. At that moment, however, he was simply the man in seat 2B, and fate had just placed them side by side above the clouds. The jet began rolling toward the runway, and Ava settled deeper into the oversized leather seat, still trying to understand how she had ended up on a flight that looked nothing like the commercial plane she was used to. Outside, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold against the dark evening sky. Beside her, the stranger remained surprisingly relaxed, as if this level of luxury meant nothing to him. The engines grew louder, and moments later the aircraft lifted smoothly into the air. Ava glanced out the window as the lights below became tiny sparks in the distance. For a moment, she forgot about overdue bills, freelance deadlines, and the uncertainty waiting for her back home. "So," she said, turning toward him, "what exactly do you do in aviation?" The man looked amused. "That is a complicated question." Ava laughed. "That usually means somebody has a boring answer. Or a very long one." "I have 3 hours," she replied. His smile widened. "Then, maybe I should start with the short version. I build things." Ava tilted her head. "Airplanes." "Sometimes. That is not a real answer." "It is technically true." She shook her head, already realizing he had a talent for revealing very little while somehow keeping the conversation interesting. A flight attendant approached and offered refreshments. To Ava's surprise, she seemed to know the man well, but he simply thanked her and returned his attention to Ava. "What about you?" he asked. "What takes you to Aspen?" Ava hesitated before answering. Most people lost interest the moment she mentioned art. "I am an illustrator. Professional, trying to be." That sounds professional to me. She smiled faintly. Tell that to my bank account. The comment earned a genuine laugh from him. Encouraged, Ava found herself opening up. She spoke about drawing since childhood, about filling notebooks with sketches during classes, and about working late nights to finish commissions that barely paid enough to cover rent. Unlike most people, he listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He did not check his phone. He simply listened. As the conversation continued, Ava pulled a folded sketchpad from her bag. This is probably embarrassing, she admitted. But I draw when I am nervous. May I see? She handed it over. Ethan studied page after page. City skylines. Coffee shops. Strangers on park benches. Small moments most people never noticed. His expression softened. These are incredible. Ava felt her cheeks warm. You do not have to say that. I know. For a brief moment neither spoke. Beyond the window, endless clouds glowed silver beneath the moonlight. Ava stared at the view and instinctively began sketching again. A few quick pencil strokes captured the clouds drifting beneath the aircraft. Ethan watched quietly. Something about her reminded him of a world he rarely saw anymore, one untouched by boardrooms, headlines, and billion-dollar decisions. Then the aircraft encountered a pocket of rough air. The cabin shook unexpectedly. Ava gripped the armrest as her pencil slipped from her fingers. Before she could react, Ethan reached over and steadied it for her. Their eyes met for a second longer than either expected. Neither realized that this simple flight was becoming the beginning of a story neither of them would ever forget. By the time the jet began its descent into Aspen, the conversation between Ava and Ethan felt strangely effortless, as if they had known each other much longer than a few hours. The snow-covered mountains appeared beyond the window, glowing beneath the first light of morning. Ava stared at the view and smiled. I have never seen anything like this in person. Ethan watched her reaction more than the scenery itself. Then I am glad your flight was delayed. Ava laughed softly. You mean the disaster that almost made me miss everything? Sometimes the best things happen because of bad timing. She shook her head. You really like speaking in riddles. Only when the truth sounds less interesting. The aircraft touched down smoothly. As passengers prepared to leave, Ava carefully tucked her sketchpad back into her bag. Neither of them seemed eager for the flight to end. That realization surprised both of them. For Ava, strangers usually remained strangers. For Ethan, most conversations ended the moment people learned who he was. Yet somehow this felt different. As they stepped into the private terminal, Ava noticed several people waiting nearby. Some wore business suits. Others carried tablets and folders. The moment Ethan appeared, a few of them straightened instinctively. Ava frowned. Looks like somebody important is arriving. Ethan glanced toward the group and immediately looked away. Probably. Before she could question him further, one of the assistants approached. Sir, the car is ready. Ethan gave the man a quick look that seemed to silence any further explanation. Ava noticed the exchange, but could not quite understand it. Well, she said, adjusting the strap on her bag. This is where we go back to being strangers, I guess. For the first time since they met, Ethan looked genuinely disappointed. Do we have to? The question caught her off guard. A smile appeared before she could stop it. You are asking for my number? I am asking for a way to continue arguing about whether my answers are boring. Ava laughed. She pulled a pen from her bag and wrote her number on the corner of an old boarding pass. There. Now you can send me mysterious aviation riddles whenever you want. Ethan accepted the paper carefully. His eyes lingered on the handwritten number longer than necessary. Then another employee appeared beside him, clearly waiting. Time was running out. Ava stepped backward. Good luck with whatever it is you build. Ethan smiled. Good luck with the showcase. She turned and walked toward the terminal exit. Halfway across the lobby, she looked back one last time. Ethan was still standing exactly where she had left him, watching. Moments later, she disappeared into the crowd. Ethan looked down at the boarding pass in his hand. Most people would have seen a phone number. He saw something else. The first genuine connection he had felt in years. And as his driver opened the door outside, Ethan Brooks made a decision that would change everything. He was going to see Ava Carter again, even if he had to leave fate a little help this time. Ava spent the next 2 days preparing for the showcase, but no matter how hard she tried to focus, her thoughts kept drifting back to the man from the flight. It annoyed her more than she wanted to admit. She had come to Aspen for an opportunity, not for a stranger with a talent for mysterious answers and inconvenient smiles. The gallery hosting the event occupied a renovated brick building near the center of town. Large windows overlooked snow-covered streets lined with boutiques and cafes. On the morning of the exhibition, Ava arrived early carrying a portfolio case beneath her arm. Artists moved through the space, making final adjustments while staff arranged lighting and displays. Ava found her assigned section near the back wall and carefully unpacked her illustrations. Most of her work focused on ordinary moments people often overlooked. A woman reading beside a rainy window. A father holding his daughter's hand at a crosswalk. A lone traveler watching clouds from an airplane seat. The last sketch made her pause. It was the drawing she had finished during the flight. The silver clouds beneath the aircraft. The quiet moment before landing. Without realizing it, she smiled. That one is beautiful. Ava turned instantly. Her heart skipped. Ethan stood a few feet away, hands tucked casually into his coat pockets. For a second, she simply stared at him. You have got to be kidding me. His grin appeared immediately. That is not exactly the reaction I hoped for. What are you doing here? Attending an art showcase. In Aspen? I heard there was an artist worth seeing. Ava shook her head, trying not to laugh. You planned this. Planned what? This mysterious coincidence. Ethan placed a hand over his chest. I am deeply offended by that accusation. She rolled her eyes. You are impossible. Yet despite her words, she could not stop smiling. They spent the next hour walking through the gallery together. Ethan listened as Ava explained the stories behind her illustrations. Unlike many visitors who focused only on prices or trends, he seemed genuinely interested in why she created them. When she described how a single moment could reveal an entire story, he paid attention to every word. As the crowd grew larger, Ava noticed something unusual. Several people recognized Ethan. A few greeted him with surprising respect. Others seemed almost nervous around him. Each time it happened, Ethan politely redirected the conversation and moved on. The pattern repeated often enough that Ava could not ignore it. All right, she finally said. Who exactly are you? Ethan raised an eyebrow. I thought we covered that. I build things. Normal people do not get greeted like visiting royalty. Maybe they are just very friendly. Ava laughed. Nice try. Before Ethan could answer, a sharply dressed woman approached. She stopped the moment she saw him. Mr. Brooks, the board meeting has been moved forward by 30 minutes. Ava froze. Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. The woman immediately realized her mistake. I am sorry, she said quickly before stepping away. Ava slowly turned toward Ethan. For the first time since they met, the question she had been ignoring suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Ava stared at Ethan for several seconds after the woman walked away. The sounds of the gallery seemed to fade into the background. Visitors continued moving between displays. Glasses clinked softly near the refreshment table, and conversations floated through the room, but Ava barely noticed any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the man standing beside her. Mr. Brooks? She repeated slowly. Ethan let out a quiet breath. Ava. No. Do not Ava me. Despite the seriousness of the moment, he almost smiled. That is usually my name. She folded her arms. You said you build things. I do. You said you worked in aviation. I do. Ava narrowed her eyes. You conveniently forgot to mention people call you Mr. Brooks. Ethan glanced toward the ceiling as if searching for an escape route that clearly did not exist. In my defense, you never asked for my full resume. She tried not to laugh. The fact that she almost did only made her more frustrated. Who are you exactly? For the first time since they met, Ethan seemed to choose his words carefully. Someone who wanted one normal conversation. Ava studied his face. There was no arrogance in his expression, no sign that he was trying to impress her. If anything, he looked uncomfortable. That is not an answer. Ethan nodded. Fair enough. He gestured toward a quieter corner of the gallery. Walk with me. Ava hesitated before following. They stopped beside a large window overlooking the snowy street below. Ethan remained silent for a moment. Brooks Aerospace is my company. Ava blinked. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Then the memory hit her. Airports. News articles. Industry magazines she had seen in waiting rooms. Her eyes widened. Wait. Ethan nodded. Yes. That Brooks Aerospace? Unfortunately, there is only one. Ava stared at him in disbelief. Suddenly the private jet made sense. The assistance. The respect people showed him. even the flight attendant who seemed to know him personally. Every strange detail clicked into place. You own the aircraft? Yes. The one we flew on? Yes. And you sat there pretending to be a regular passenger? Ethan smiled faintly. Technically, I was a regular passenger. I happened to own the plane. Ava shook her head. That is ridiculous. I am aware. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, light snow drifted across the street. Finally, Ava asked the question that mattered most. Why hide it? Ethan looked away briefly. Because the moment people learn who I am, they stop talking to me and start talking to the company. Ava felt something shift inside her. The answer sounded honest. Not rehearsed. Honest. Ethan continued quietly. You talked about your drawings, your dreams, your struggles. You laughed at my terrible jokes. You did not care about any title. His eyes met hers. I like that. Ava felt her heartbeat quicken unexpectedly. Before she could respond, a crowd began gathering near the center of the gallery. An announcement echoed through the room. The evening auction was about to begin. Neither of them realized that before the night was over, another surprise was waiting. One that would pull their lives even closer together. The crowd slowly gathered around the small stage at the center of the gallery as the charity auction prepared to begin. Ava stood near the back beside Ethan, still processing everything she had learned. Brooks Aerospace, the private jet, the fortune, the title. None of it matched the man who had spent hours listening to her talk about sketchbooks and coffee shops. Yet somehow, standing beside him now, he still felt like the same person. The auction host stepped onto the stage and welcomed the guests. One by one, pieces from various artists appeared on large display screens while bids climbed higher and higher. Ava watched politely, expecting nothing. Most of the featured artists had established careers and loyal collectors. She was simply grateful to have been invited. Then the host smiled toward her section of the room. Our next piece comes from a rising illustrator whose work has captured the attention of many guests this evening. Ava froze. Her cloud sketch appeared on the giant screen. The same drawing she had started during the flight. The same drawing Ethan had quietly admired. A ripple of interest moved through the crowd. The opening bid was announced. Ava expected silence. Instead, a paddle immediately rose. The price doubled. Another bidder joined. Then another. Ava stared in disbelief as the number climbed far beyond anything she had ever received for her artwork. Her hands trembled slightly. This cannot be happening, she whispered. Ethan looked genuinely pleased. Looks like people see what I saw. The bidding continued until only 2 participants remained. The room grew quieter with each increase. Finally, one bidder shook his head and lowered his paddle. The auctioneer smiled broadly and brought down the gavel. Applause filled the gallery. Ava could barely breathe. The final amount was more money than she had earned during several months of freelance work combined. Who bought it? She asked. The host glanced toward the back of the room. An anonymous collector. Ava looked around, searching for clues, but no answer appeared. As the event continued, guests approached to congratulate her. For the first time in years, strangers were discussing her work with genuine excitement. Hours later, after the gallery began to empty, Ava and Ethan stepped outside into the cold mountain air. Snowflakes drifted lazily beneath the streetlights. The town felt peaceful, almost magical. Ava wrapped her coat tighter around herself and looked toward Ethan. Did you know that would happen? Ethan smiled. I had a feeling people would like your work. That was not what I asked. He laughed quietly. Then no, I did not know. They walked slowly through the snowy streets, neither eager to end the evening. At one point, they passed a bookstore with large windows glowing against the darkness. Ava stopped and looked inside. Ethan noticed the way her eyes lit up. Without thinking, he memorized the moment. The simple happiness, the genuine wonder. And as they continued walking, he realized something that should have frightened him. He was no longer looking for an excuse to see Ava again. He was already searching for reasons not to say goodbye. The next morning, Ethan sat alone in the back seat of a black SUV as it moved through the snowy streets of Aspen. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from executives, investors, and board members, but for once, none of them held his attention. Instead, he found himself looking at a photograph he had quietly taken the night before. It was not even a picture of Ava. It was a picture of the sketch she had created during the flight. The clouds, the soft pencil lines, the perspective only she seemed able to see. You are distracted. Ethan looked up. Claire, His longtime assistant, sat across from him reviewing a stack of documents. That obvious? Claire nodded. You ignored 3 board members this morning. One of them thought you lost signal. Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe I did. Claire studied him carefully. She had worked with him for nearly 8 years. She knew the difference between stress and something else. This is about the artist. Ethan did not answer immediately. Outside, snow drifted across the sidewalks as tourists moved between shops and cafes. Finally, he spoke. Do you know what the strange thing is? What? She has no idea what she is supposed to do around people like me. Claire laughed softly. Most people spend months trying to get your attention. Exactly. Ethan leaned back in his seat. She never asked about the company. Never asked about money. Never asked about connections. He paused. She asked about airplanes. Claire smiled knowingly. That seems to be bothering you. It is. Why? Ethan looked out the window again. The answer came easier than expected. Because I like her. The admission surprised even him. Claire remained silent for a moment. Then she said something he had not expected. Good. Ethan looked over. Good. You have spent years building walls around yourself. Claire closed her folder. Maybe it is time somebody climbed over one. Ethan laughed quietly, but her words stayed with him. The truth was more complicated than attraction. Years earlier, he had watched relationships change the moment people discovered who he was. Conversations became negotiations. Compliments became opportunities. Trust became difficult. Eventually, he stopped trying. It was easier to focus on business than wonder whether someone cared about him or the life attached to his name. Then Ava had appeared. She had laughed at him, challenged him, questioned him. She had treated him like a man sitting beside her on a flight, not a headline or a company logo. For the first time in years, he felt seen rather than recognized. Later that afternoon, Ethan arrived at another corporate meeting inside a luxury hotel. Executives discussed expansion plans, quarterly projections, and investment strategies. He listened carefully, answered questions, and made decisions. Yet part of his mind remained somewhere else entirely. Meanwhile, across town, Ava sat alone inside a small coffee shop near the gallery. A notebook rested open in front of her. She was trying to sketch, but her thoughts kept drifting toward Ethan Brooks. The billionaire. The businessman. The man who somehow seemed more comfortable discussing clouds than stock prices. Neither of them knew it yet, but the distance between their worlds was about to become impossible to ignore. 3 days later, Aspen no longer felt like a temporary stop in Ava's life. The showcase had ended, but unexpected opportunities continued appearing. Gallery owners requested meetings. Collectors asked about future commissions. For the first time, her dream felt less like a distant possibility and more like something she could actually reach. Yet alongside the excitement came something else she had not anticipated. Attention. One afternoon, while reviewing sketches inside a cafe, Ava noticed 2 women at a nearby table whispering while looking at their phones. At first she ignored it. Then one of them glanced directly at her. Curious, Ava opened a social media app and immediately froze. A photograph from the gallery had begun circulating online. In the image, she and Ethan stood together discussing one of her illustrations. The caption was harmless enough, but the comments were not. Some speculated she was a new business partner. Others assumed she came from a wealthy family. A few insisted she was secretly dating one of the most influential executives in the country. Ava stared at the screen in disbelief. None of these people knew her. None of them knew the truth. Yet thousands of strangers seemed eager to invent their own version of her life. Her phone buzzed. Ethan. She hesitated before answering. Please tell me you have not seen the internet today, he said. Ava laughed despite herself. A little late for that. Ethan sighed. I am sorry. Why are you apologizing? Because this happens whenever my name appears near anything. Ava looked out the cafe window at the snow-covered street. Do you deal with this all the time? More than I would like. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan said something unexpected. I never wanted you dragged into it. Ava could hear the sincerity in his voice. I know. That evening, Ethan invited her to dinner at a quiet restaurant away from the main tourist areas. The place was small, warm, and surprisingly ordinary. Exactly the kind of place Ava preferred. As they sat together near a fireplace, conversation came easily once again. They talked about childhood dreams, favorite books, and the strange paths that had brought them to Aspen. Yet throughout the evening, Ava noticed something. Whenever another guest recognized Ethan, a subtle distance appeared in his expression. It vanished quickly, but she saw it. The weight of constant attention. The pressure of always being watched. As they left the restaurant later that night, snow drifted gently through the air. Ethan walked beside her in silence for several moments before speaking. You know, if all of this becomes too much, I would understand. Ava stopped walking and looked at him. What if I do not want to walk away? For the first time, Ethan seemed genuinely caught off guard. A faint smile appeared. But before he could answer, neither of them noticed a photographer across the street capturing another image. And by morning, that photograph would create problems neither of them saw coming. The next morning, Ava woke to a flood of notifications. Her phone screen seemed endless. Messages from friends she had not spoken to in months. Emails from journalists. Social media tags from strangers. Confused, she opened the first article and immediately felt her stomach tighten. There, across several entertainment and business websites, was the photograph from the night before. She and Ethan standing together beneath the falling snow, looking completely unaware of the camera. The headlines varied, but the message was the same. The billionaire executive had been spotted with a mysterious woman. Ava stared at the screen. What had felt personal and private only hours earlier now belonged to the public. Her phone rang. Ethan. She answered immediately. I am guessing you saw it. His voice sounded calm, but she could hear the frustration beneath it. Everyone saw it. Ethan sighed. I tried to get ahead of it. This is normal for you, is it? Ava asked quietly. No, he admitted. Unfortunately, it becomes normal if you stay around me long enough. The words lingered in her mind after the call ended. Stay around me. The possibility suddenly felt real. Later that afternoon, Ava attended a networking event connected to the showcase. The ballroom was filled with collectors, gallery owners, investors, and artists. As she entered, conversation shifted. People recognized her. Some smiled warmly. Others looked curious. A few seemed interested for reasons that had nothing to do with her artwork. Ava tried to ignore it. She focused on discussing her portfolio and future projects. Then she overheard two guests talking nearby. That is her. The billionaire's new girlfriend? That is what everyone is saying. Ava felt her smile disappear. They were not discussing her work. They were discussing Ethan. Everything she had accomplished during the past week suddenly felt smaller. That evening, Ethan arrived at the event to deliver a keynote presentation supporting young artists and creative entrepreneurs. Ava sat near the back of the room as the lights dimmed. The moment Ethan stepped onto the stage, the atmosphere changed. Massive screens displayed the Brooks Aerospace logo behind him. Hundreds of guests applauded. Executives stood to greet him. Investors competed for his attention. For the first time, Ava saw the full scale of his world. The private jet had been only a glimpse. This was something entirely different. Powerful, global, unreachable. Ethan spoke confidently about innovation, opportunity, and creating pathways for new talent. The audience hung on every word. Yet while everyone else watched the stage, Ethan's eyes occasionally searched the crowd. Each time they found Ava. When the presentation ended, applause filled the ballroom. Ava remained seated for a moment longer. Suddenly, the distance between them felt larger than ever. One world operated through boardrooms, headlines, and billion-dollar decisions. The other was built from sketchbooks, commissions, and fragile dreams. And for the first time since they met, Ava found herself wondering whether those two worlds could ever truly belong together.